Welcome, Retroholic Gamers, to the channel where knowledge is free and experience is earned. Today, I'm going to show you how to optimize your Nintendo 64 on a Raspberry Pi 4. It can be a little bit of effort in comparison to most other things on the Raspberry Pi 4, but pretty simple once you get everything going. And the first thing I will show you is how to overclock your Raspberry Pi 4, because if you don't overclock it, it's not going to run very well. So it's a must-do, which means you need to make sure you've got adequate cooling on your Raspberry Pi 4, such as fan, heat sinks, preferably very adequate cooling in my opinion, because if you're going to overclock it, you run risk of burning out your Raspberry Pi 4. So if you're willing to spend the money, maybe a nice cooling tower, or one that I've got, which is a aluminum heatsink fan with dual fans. It's pretty decent. So with all that, let's sort of jump into it. I'm going to show you all the different emulators that on the Raspberry Pi 4 that run Nintendo 64, and how to set those up, along with setting up a USB Nintendo 64 controller. This is just a cheap one off of eBay. You can normally pick them up for close to $20 AUD. But pretty much you can set up any controller for this, but then really pay attention to the instructions of setting up a Nintendo 64 controller. It may differ depending on what kind of controller you have, but there is quite a bit in getting the controller to work correctly depending on which emulator you are using. And the emulator is ROM specific if you want to get certain ROMs running as best as possible. With that, first thing, you're going to need a micro SD card reader, and pop your SD card into that and pop that into your PC or laptop so we can overclock it. Once we've done that, we'll jump into setting up the controller, then installing all the emulators we're going to be using. Then once we've got all our emulators on, there's a few emulators that require a little bit of setup, such as tweaking the controller configuration. They actually all do, but there's two easy methods for it, but both need to be done. And finally, setting up a couple of the emulators. Some don't need any setting changes, some do. So we'll cover that, and let's jump in.
Once you've plugged your SD card into your PC or laptop using a micro SD card reader, you will have a hard drive pop up on your file explorer saying something like boot E or boot F depending on your hard drives. Simply open boot, you will see all this stuff pop up. Then what you'll want to do is edit this config text file. You can do this with Microsoft Notepad, or I like to use Notepad++. Once you've opened that, you can then scroll down your config text file till you find this line here, overclock the ARM. See hashtag ARMFreak equals 800. You will then want to get this information here, ARMFreak2 equals 2000, over voltage equals 6, and GPU frequency equals 750. Simply get all that, remove the hashtag ARMFreak equals 800, and insert the new information right here like so. Make sure there is no hashtag in front of it or it will mess things up. Save your config text file, close, go back out, and eject the micro SD card reader. Now it is safe to remove your micro SD card reader and take your SD card out and insert it back into your Raspberry Pi.
Okay, so to first set up your controller, once you have plugged it in and turned your Raspberry Pi on, you will get a screen that looks like this saying a gamepad is detected. I have with me a little cheat sheet, if you will. I find it very useful to write down all the controllers for your emulation station configuration, then write down all the buttons for your controller. This is set up for a Nintendo 64, and on the right here I will write down the button that is related from the settings on this controller so that I can match them up with the N64 and the ES station settings. This is very useful and helpful, as you will see later on. So to begin, hold A, and you'll see you have D-pad up. So obviously for D-pad up, you will press D-pad up. You'll see it comes up as #0 up. So that is what I will write down next to here. And D-pad down, like so. #0 down. Left, right, let's do 2 at a time. Speed this up. Now start comes up as button 12. So for select, you'll see I have put down here, it'll be C down. That is button 0. A. 1. B is 2. C left will be our X button, which is button 3. C up will be our Y, button 9. Our left shoulder will be our left shoulder, and that is button 4. And right shoulder, same, your right trigger, shoulder, button 5. And for left trigger, I have put down as your Z trigger, so you will press your Z, button 6. And our right trigger will be our C button right, and that is button 8. Then, as you can see, left thumb and right thumb, we do not have that on our Nintendo 64 controller, so we will just hold down A, so it comes up as not defined. Same for right thumb. And then we're on our left analog will be our analog stick. So for analog up, just point up. You don't need to write these ones down, it won't be a big deal. Left and right. And then when it comes to the right analog stick, we will have nothing, so hold down A, so it comes up as not defined. Once we get up to our hotkey enable, we will set this as the left shoulder button, as it is one of the least used buttons in Nintendo 64. There might be some games where this could be a confliction. If so, maybe you might just have to reconfigure your controller to best fit that particular game. So that will be button 4. Then hold A, press A, our controller is configured. Okay, so our next step is to make sure we have all the necessary emulators installed. So to do that, we will go to RetroPie configuration. Now you need to make sure that you are connected to the internet so you can install the emulators. You can either do that by setting up your Wi-Fi with your RetroPie, or just plug an Ethernet cable in so that you have access to the internet. Then we go to RetroPie setup. This will just take a moment to load. Once loaded, we go down to Manage Packages. And we'll just have a quick look in Manage Main Packages. So the emulators that are already installed that you will need is MuPen64 Plus. And if you scroll down a little bit, you will find lr-emulators Plus Next and lr-emulators Plus. So they're all installed. So we'll go back and then scroll down to Manage Experimental Packages. There is one emulator in here that we will need, and that is lr-N64, which is right here. So once we've located that at number 119, we then click OK. And once this screen has come up, we will choose Install from Pre-compiled Binary. Do not install from source. Pre-compiled binary is the preferred method. And it will ask, are you sure you want to install? Go yes. And then we'll wait for your emulator to install. Alright, now our emulator is installed. That did not take too long at all. We just go back and then back again. Then one thing I do like to do before we continue is I like to go to Manage All Installed Packages, and I like to update all installed packages just to make sure everything is up to date. We'll ask if you're sure, go yes, and then wait a short while, and this will make sure that everything is up to date. Okay, now that that is done, we can go back and back again, and always good after installing new things and updating is perform a reboot. So we'll click OK and click yes. Okay, so now that our emulators are installed, we can start setting up our games. So I have 7 games here ready to test each of the emulators and show you how to set them up. So we're going to start with Super Mario 64. Now when you first start the game up, you launch it by pressing A, and you will have a prompt screen in the middle of when you select the game and the game actually starts, where you can configure your launch options. So once you launch the game, quickly keep tapping A until your option screen comes up. There it is. So we go back. So as you can see here, you can select a default emulator, which generally the main one that is defaulted is lr-emulators Plus Next. So at the moment we will leave that so we can set it up, because Super Mario 64 is one of the easier games for setting up your controller configuration for the lr-emulators Plus Next emulator. So we will get to these other things momentarily. The only thing we are going to set up right now is we are going to select a video mode. So to do that, we will click on this third option, select video mode for lr-emulators Plus Next. Now we have a whole bunch of different resolutions. When setting up for Nintendo 64, the best resolution, which will help increase the optimization of your N64, is 640 by 480. So I prefer to go with the 60 Hz 4x3. That is the best option here. So we will select that and launch our game. Okay, so now if we press start, we will come to our main menu. Now start button works fine, but as you get to here, you will press your A to select your profile, and for some reason it will do nothing. Your joystick will work, but our A does not. So to fix this, we need to reconfigure our RetroArch settings. We will get to our RetroArch settings by holding down our hotkey and pressing our X button, or as on our controller it is set to C left, so we will hold left shoulder and C left. Now this opens our quick menu. As you can see here, we will press back, or B for back, so we can come to the main menu of our RetroArch Emulator, our RetroArch setup. As you come down, you can see settings, that is what we'll want. Then continue down to input and follow through to port 1 controls. This is the only one we will need. We need to go through and fix up our controller setup. So if you come down to D-pad up, we will press A and press up on our D-pad on our controller, and likewise for the others. Down, left and right. Ignore your C1 and go to A button, which for some reason has auto configured to 2. So we will press A on that and press A again. So now it is button 1. Go down to your B button, press A again and press your B button, and it has changed it to 2. So now down to our start button, press A to select it and press your start button. Now it is button 12. And press our left shoulder button, right shoulder button, down press your Z trigger, ignore the C buttons mode, and come down, you will see your control stick Y. These will be left alone as it is your analog stick, and it should be configured perfectly fine. So then you'll come down to C buttons. Now, it's not very definitive as to which C button is which, but I have gone through and tested these. So your very first one, C button Y, is your C up. So if you select that with A, then press C up. And then your second one is your C down. First top X is your C left, and then C right for the final, your fourth C button X. And continue down if you have a controller where you would like to set up a turbo hotkey, that is there. And go around to save controller profile. It's done. Now, if we hold our hotkey and press X or C left again, now if you press A, you will see it is working. So now we'll just jump into the game and test that all our controls are correctly configured. You might find there's some little graphical shudders and stuff at times. That can be due to my recording and the TV I'm running it on. On a high quality TV, if you're using a 4K TV or something like that, it definitely looks good and does not have that. Okay, so our A jumps, joystick, still working fine. Z works fine. B punches, yes. C buttons all seem to be working. Right shoulder works. Now when we press the left trigger, you'll see it tries to do a loading state. That is, as I said earlier, there can be some conflictions with your hotkeys. You can make your hotkey something else, like say your C down button, something that doesn't cause a confliction, because what's happening is left shoulder is also the loading state button, so when I press the left trigger it's doing a loading state as it's the hotkey and the loading state button. We can fix that if we open up our RetroArch menu again by holding down left shoulder and C left, or X, and we come back in. Now your A and B might not work on your controller after we reconfigured these settings. So if you have a keyboard plugged in, Z we'll go back and X is select, and so I'll press Z here. That takes us back out to the input menu. Then if you go up to hotkeys and press X on your keyboard, or A if it works, or does it on mine, we can see all our hotkey keybinds. So you'll see our button 4 is the loading state. So what I'm going to do is change that to my C down button. So X, and I'll press C down, button 0. Now let's double check that that's not conflicting with any other hotkey config. No. So that should be perfectly fine. You can also see you can set up other things like a confirm quit hotkey or slow motion. And yeah, you can play around with those as you like. Hotkey to change your state slot. So button 5 is our save state. Okay, so if we just quickly close that again with our hotkey left shoulder and X or C left. Now we're back out, and if I press the left shoulder, see it no longer does a load state. I hold down my left shoulder and press C down, there's the load state. So I believe left shoulder and right shoulder will do the save state, so I saved it to state 0, and then I can hold left shoulder, press C down, and it loads up. And that's how you do load states and eliminate that loading state hotkey stuff up. And that's how our controller's configured. So now if you hold left shoulder and press start, it'll quit us back out into the emulation station menu. Okay, so now that we've got our RetroArch controllers configured, the next method for controller configuration is setting up your controllers for your Gles2n64 and Gles2n64 and your Rice emulator. So to do that, we are going to need to plug in a keyboard and hit F4 to bring yourself to the Pi command prompt. Now we will need to open up a auto config file. So to do so, we will type sudo nano /opt/retropie. Now this is case sensitive. Configs N64 / input. Now this is a capital I for input, all one word, auto, a capital A for auto, and a capital C, lowercase fg for config, .i and I, and hit enter. So now you will see a screen like this pop up. So as we scroll down, you will see I have, whoops, fix that up. I have a keyboard set up right here, and then if you come down in second, you will see my USB gamepad. That is not our Nintendo controller. That is a controller I plugged in to preset things up for this. You will come down and find this Switchco Ltd controller dinput. That is my Nintendo 64 controller that I have plugged in. Is a Switchco Ltd. That's its name. And we will have to come right down. So once we can see everything, you will see our controllers right under the Rumble Pack switch. Now, I'm not getting into Rumble Pack switch right now. I do not understand that, so let's leave it be. So you will find your controller. Now this is where our cheat sheet comes handy. You will see left trigger is button 4. So we check our cheat sheet. Our left trigger should be, so now this is your ES controllers, not your actual N64. You will find left shoulder. If we go across, it is button 4. So you will see that one is correct. Then we check our D-pad up, and that is at 0 up, that is correct. D-pad left, or L, and that is correct. Our y-axis, that should all be fine, so leave that be. You'll have D-pad right, that should be fine. Now if we come to Z trigger, which we had as our left trigger on our Pi ES, which is button 6. So that is button 6, that is correct. And our right trigger, which is our right shoulder, button 5, that is also correct. Then we will come down to B button, which for us should be button 2. So now it is button 2, as it was not correct. Check your C button up. It should be button 9, but it is set to button 3, so let us fix that. Then we've got our D-pad down, that is correct. And our start button is 12, which is also correct. Now our A button is set to button 2, which isn't right. Our A button should be button 1. So let's fix that. And we've got our C button down, which if we check our sheet, C button down is select, which should be button 0. Fix that up. Now, as you might have realized, we are missing our C button left and C button right. So we are going to have to add these buttons. So let's hit enter to make an extra space. Then capital C, space, capital B, U, T, T, O, N, space, L, space, equals, space, all lowercase, button, open bracket, and our C button left should be button 3. Close bracket, and let's add C button right. Our C button right should be button 8. And that is our controller setup for our N64 Plus plugins. Now to save that, we will press or hold Control and press X, and you'll see a little line come up at the bottom asking if you would like to save. Just press Y and hit enter. Now it has saved our controller configuration. So now we will go back to our emulation station by typing emulation station. All one word, hit enter. Okay, so now we can go back to our Nintendo 64. Let's come down to Super Mario 64 again. As we were messing around with lr-emulators Plus Next, that is one of the two continued to be worked on and updated emulators on the Raspberry Pi or RetroPie, and the other one is the Gles2n64. I believe Parallel 64 might still be working on as well. I can't confirm that though. So they are the two emulators you will want to use the most. So what we will do is go to open up Super Mario 64 once again, tapping A to get to our emulator config. Now, my advice is change your default emulator to Gles2n64. Once we have done that, we will have to set up our video mode again, come down to 87 by 29 or the 640 by 480 at 60 Hz 4x3. Alright, now Super Mario 64 does actually run rather well on the Gles2n64 high-res. So we will select emulator for this specific game, which we will switch to Gles2n high-res. So now if you open up any game without changing any of the configurations, it will come out as the Gles2n64 plugin for the N64 Plus. And once again, we have to set up the video mode for our Gles2n64 high-res. As we've not done that, it must be done for each emulator or plugin. this only needs to be done once for each emulator. Once that is done, we can launch our game. So, as you can see, this looks a lot better. Our controllers should all be set up and working perfectly fine. You might find some slight graphical issues in comparison to the real deal, but that is more often than not the price you pay for emulation. I myself personally prefer to play on an actual Nintendo 64, but I love everything Nintendo 64, so getting into running it on a Raspberry Pi or Retro Pi is still something on my bucket list, and I figured I would share my knowledge with the rest of you. Yeah, that's very readable. I like that. Runs perfectly fine. You might also find that your TV might make things look a little bit different as well, and that is good. Checking all my controls. Yep, everything seems to go well, so now I will quit out with my hotkey, left shoulder, and start. Okay, so now we will set up Diddy Kong Racing next. So pressing your A to get to the config screen, go back. We will select emulator for ROM, and for Diddy Kong Racing it will be lr-emulators plus next. So you'll see our video mode comes straight up for it, as we've already done some of the setting for this, and that should run fine. I won't launch this game so as to save time. You will see for yourself. That is the best emulator for this game. So exit launching. Now the next one we will set up is Duke Nukem 64. Cancel, down, select emulator, we go lr-emulators plus. There is nothing special to set up except making sure you're on the right video mode for this emulator. All the way down to our 8729, 640 by 480, 60 Hz, 4x3. So I will not show this one either, as there's nothing special to see. It is probably not the best emulator. This one is definitely at the bottom of the list graphic wise. It doesn't look amazing, but for some games they do not work on any of the other emulators, or are too choppy on audio, or some other graphical reason, so this is the best choice. So we will exit without launching. We will do GoldenEye next. So open this up, we go to our emulator, and this one will be LR Parallel N64. So the LR stands for a RetroArch core, which means we've already set up our controls. So just because we all love GoldenEye, after I have set the video mode, I will give it a little twirl so you can see how it runs on Parallel 64. As this is one of the most whinged about games that does not run well, it actually runs rather well on Parallel 64. Not many other games do. I believe Marines works alright on it, and a couple others, but very few will actually work on this emulator. There is some discrepancies that can very well just be from my recording or the TV that I am running this on at the moment. Note that on a better TV it may look much better. And there we go. Now let's go back to our ES station. Okay, next on the list is Duke Nukem 0 Hour with Gles2n64. So tap A into our configure, select emulator for game, and go to Gles2n64. Make sure we change the video mode. 8729, 640 by 480, 4x3. Now I'll launch this game so you can see what the issue with this emulator is, and then I will show you how to fix it. So as you can see, the picture comes up down in the bottom there, looking real small. So now let's go back to our emulation station with our left shoulder and start. Alright, now we will hit F4 to go to our Pi command prompt, and we will type sudo nano /opt /retropie. So this is case sensitive, /configs /n64, make sure that's a lowercase n, /gles, GLES, to N64 .conf, CONF. Hit enter. Now we will scroll down to our window settings. As you will see, window width equals 400 and height 240. We need to change our window width to 640 and our height to 480. And that is all we need to change here. So that matches our resolution that we have set for the emulator. So if you really want to try running it at a different resolution, make sure you match this to whatever resolution you are running it on, but I highly recommend 640 by 480. So now we will hit Control X, press Y to save, and hit enter. Now it's set. Let's go back to Emulation Station by typing Emulation Station. And hey presto, it is full screen. Results. Alright, let's go back. So left shoulder and start to go back to Emulation Station. Okay, so now we are going to move on to our Rice plugin. So for that one, we will be doing it on Mystical Ninja starring Geoman. So before we even start the emulator this time, we're going to have to go to our RetroPie command prompt again with F4. And this time we are going to be writing in sudo nano /opt /retropie /configs /n64. Now it's Rice with a capital R, no spaces, video, capital V for video, Linux, so capital L for Linux, .ini. Now you will see this big screen come up with a whole list of games. Now it is a rather big list, so as you can see down there it says there's 1,625 lines. So we don't want to scroll down trying to look for our game. We are going to quick search. So for that, we will use where is. So hold down Control and press W. We'll come up with a search bar. So from here, we will write mystical. So all depending on the game you're putting in here, it's easy to just maybe go with one defining word, as sometimes the name of the game in this config file or index file, whatever you want to call it, does not exactly match the game. So look for a defining word or number and hit enter. So let's see, yes, see, here we go, Mystical Ninja. So now we'll have a look, and there's a couple things underneath here already. We are going to leave those alone, and we want to add one extra line. And that line will be screen update. Now it's a capital S, capital U, setting, capital S for setting, equals 7, no spaces. So this will stop the flashing that comes with the Rice emulator at times. Now the Gles2n64 emulator and the Rice, I would not highly recommend. Some games, they are the only ones that the game will run on, so they are still useful, but there's a lot of configuration, especially with this Rice, and it takes a lot to learn what to do, and it is no longer worked on, so I prefer to try and stick to emulators that people are still working on to better. And very simply put, this is the only setting you should really need to change for any games running on Rice. If you come to the game and there is already something, like it might have screen update setting equals 3 or 4 or something, leave that be. If you change it, it won't work as well. But if there is no added line saying screen update setting, add it and have it equal 7. You can mess around with this if you really like, but I don't feel it's necessary. So let's save that edit with Control X, press Y, and hit enter. Now we go back to our emulation station by typing emulation station. I perhaps should have started the game up and showed you the crazy strobe effect if you don't add that line to the game index, but honestly it is quite painful, and if you've got epilepsy, not great, so I'm not going to show that. If you want to see it yourself, be my guest and go for it. So go down to Mystical Ninja, open up our config, cancel, and select from. Let us go down to Gles2Rice, select, fix up our video mode, as we have not done it for Rice yet. 729, 640, 480, 4x3. Now launch. So now, I will say it is not perfect, but you try and play this game on any other emulator, and you will see how I recommend it as the best emulator for RetroPie. Cool, that's enough of that. Let's go back to emulation station with left shoulder and start. Okay, now very last, Geomon's Great Adventure. Now for this one, we shouldn't have to change a single thing. Tapping A as it runs on our MuPen64 plus Gles2n64, which we set as our default, and we already set the video mode for it, and nothing else needs to be done. That is the best for that game. And back to emulation station. And that's all there is to it. And there we have it. So we've set up each emulator and Nintendo 64 control, configured it correctly. Hopefully you've gained quite a bit of knowledge about how the Nintendo 64 operates on a Retro Pi on your Raspberry Pi 4. This is part 1 of a part 2 series. I do plan to show a full list of all games on the Nintendo 64 and which emulator will run those games best. And so please like and subscribe if you would like to be notified of when that video comes out. Maybe it's already out depending on when you're watching this video, so have a look for part 2 if a full list of Nintendo 64 games and which emulators run them best. Thanks for watching. Please look out for part 2 of optimizing your Nintendo 64 on a Raspberry Pi 4 Retro Pi.